Hey there, folks. Welcome to yesterday's news for August 2nd, 2018. I chuckled there because I tried the little timer feature on my phone and it beeped, and I don't know why I found it funny. Anyways, what I do find funny is all the continuing hysteria about 3D printed guns. Yeah, so I linked below an article, actual real article from the Chicago Tribune that actually calls a 3D gun in the headline, because apparently normal guns are 2D. So yeah, and I mentioned this before. This doesn't change anything. The all plastic Liberator pistol is it's a political statement, not a deadly weapon. It's really not functional. You can, however, make a functional gun with like a piece of bar stock and a drill. So the idea of homemade guns being a thing is, that's homemade guns have always been a thing. And people have been making homemade guns for as long as people have been making guns. And at least in this country, it's been completely legal forever. So, and there's all these things people getting confused about what is what. So I'm going to clarify that a little bit real quick, and then I'm going to get into some maybe a little more interesting stuff about 3D printing in general. So the Liberator pistol, there's the original Liberator pistol, which was made by the U.S. government in the 1940s for World War II. But the current thing we're talking about is all plastic. So theoretically, it can go through a metal detector. However, the ammunition is metal. And even if you can get it through, because the ammunition is very tiny and maybe it won't set off the metal detector, it's a single shot, single use 22 long rifle pistol that doesn't have a rigid enough barrel to actually get enough pressure to fire that little 22 long rifle at enough velocity to do any real damage. So it's not a useful thing. Yes, you could probably sneak it through a metal detector, but there's much more dangerous things you could sneak through a metal detector than a 3D printed plastic pistol. The other thing that, so basically one of the deals is that if you make a gun at home, you don't have to put a serial number on it, and you obviously don't pass a background check to do something in your own house. So theoretically, so this is where the term ghost gun comes from. So a ghost gun is a gun with no paper trail. It is not an undetectable gun. There is no such thing as an undetectable gun that is actually usable and dangerous. Again, like I said, even the Liberator pistol is probably actually detectable by most security checkpoints if they're doing any kind of reasonable search and metal detectors and such. And it's not even really a deadly weapon. So there is no such thing as an effective gun that is undetectable. So the term ghost gun applies to a gun that has no paper trail. And so this is a homemade gun. It is, however, extremely illegal to sell a homemade gun without the proper paperwork and FFL license. So yes, you can go in your garage and build an AR-15 for around, maybe if you're lucky, about the same price as what you can buy one for. Typically, you're going to end up spending about twice as much on everything, unless you already have a machine shop. You're going to end up spending twice as much to build an AR-15 at home that has no serial number than you will to just go to the store and buy one. Now, people are worried that this helps people get around background check rules and all that. It's illegal if you're a prohibited possessor to possess a gun, whether or not it has a serial number on it. It is illegal to sell a gun to a prohibited possessor, whether or not it has a serial number on it. So it's a loophole built into the law for the purpose of allowing inventors to experiment with firearms technology, which is a good thing because that's where most advances in that technology have come from, and including the technologies used by the military and police. So you don't want to get rid of that. You want inventors to be able to tinker, and that's exactly what that law provides. And the 80% lowers, as they're called, are just it's a hobby, and it's a political statement. It's not a more deadly weapon. You can still just go to the store and buy one in most states. Most states, there are a lot of states that allow you to buy an AR-15 if you're not a resident, because it is considered a hunting rifle. It really is. So you can, even in places where they're banned, it's still a lot easier to drive a couple states over and buy one than it is to make one in your garage. So again, adding the 3D printer to this doesn't change anything, because first of all, you can't 3D print actual gun parts. So this is where we'll get into 3D printing in general. So 3D printing right now is kind of in the position that the internet was in the late 1990s, which is it's this novel new technology that is very powerful and will probably change the world, but nobody knows exactly how, and nobody knows exactly what it's going to be useful for. And 90% of the stuff that's out there is actually not going to pan out. So that's where we're at with 3D printing. It is a powerful technology in certain areas, but there are a lot of things it just can't do, and it never will. So it's also called additive manufacturing, and my company actually does a lot of work with it. And one of the big things is that the quality of the material you get at the end is always substantially inferior to the quality of the material you would get from more traditional manufacturing techniques. Because essentially, if you're in plastics, again, you're dealing with resins that are formulated for their compatibility with the printing process, not for strength or durability typically. Some of the plastic 3D printing technologies are getting close to properties of like a standard epoxy. So you can make plastic parts for certain things that would normally be made with cheap plastic. So, your polystyrene, in injection molding, that you can replace that kind of part, but you're not going to replace the plastic parts on a gun, for instance, because the polymers that are used to make handgun frames and other components on guns, it's going to be it's actually fiberglass. It's not plastic. It's plastic mixed with very short, typically glass fibers or some other reinforcing material that is not plastic. So that is not the type of material that you can get out of a 3D printer under any circumstances, because basically you can injection mold with filled plastics because the pore size that you're pushing through is relatively large. And as long as you don't have really tight corners or really constricted features in the part, which typically gun frames don't, you can do that with an injection molding process. A 3D printer, on the other hand, is working with one of two methods, either a liquid bath or an extruded plastic, and it's coming out of a much, much smaller nozzle. And so that's going to interfere with your filled plastics. They're not going to work real well. So your 3D printed plastics are not as sturdy as regular plastics. Then when we get into 3D printed metals, which, and again, even those plastic guns, like Glocks, for instance, that everybody knows, the actual, like, the only thing that's plastic is the handle, basically, and a few other various parts. The actual mechanical parts of the gun are all still metal. There's a metal frame inside that plastic frame that actually carries the load of the slide reciprocating and all that. So that would still, and it's just a piece of stamped sheet metal, but that still would need to be, that's not plastic. And even if we could get 3D printed plastics to be similar quality to the plastics used in gun frames, you still would have to make the metal parts. So then when we get into 3D printed metals, essentially what you're doing is you're welding powder together in layers. And this produces a very unusual microstructure, which is very cool, but generally not strong. Welding is always, weld metal is always less durable, less strong, less corrosion resistant even than a otherwise processed metal, because you're dealing with extremely fast heating and cooling rates, flash solidification. This creates issues metallurgically. So 3D printed metals are maybe starting to get really the theoretical maximum. The best you can theoretically ever possibly do with 3D printed metals is going to be something comparable to a MIM process, metal injection molding, which is where you inject powdered metal into a mold, just like plastics, plastic injection molding, and then you take that rough shape, that green part, which is a mixture of powdered metal and some sort of binding agent, and then you put that in a furnace and you sinter it like you would a ceramic, and you typically would do that under pressure, and you get a metal part that gets close to the properties of a investment casting. It does have the advantage of you can work with exotic alloys. So, but that actually won't work with 3D printing. So the MIM process can allow you to work with some more exotic alloys that have to go through the powder process. But 3D printing won't do that. 3D printing has to be a weldable metal. And so theoretically, you might someday be able to get properties somewhere close to an investment casting, but it's always going to be 100 times the price of an investment casting. So why the heck do we have 3D printing? Why is there so much work being done? Two reasons. One, there are parts that don't need to be strong, that may need to have odd specific geometries, and if you have one machine that can produce all of them and it's lightweight and small, then that can be advantageous for, if you're doing work in a remote environment and you need the ability to fix stuff. Theoretically, maybe, probably never actually going to be that useful, because for the most part, you're better off having a better designed tool and a welding equipment than trying to 3D print a new part when one breaks. So the two things that you really can do with 3D printing is rapid prototyping. So it's basically not even not even really prototyping as much as mock-ups. So you can make 3D printed mock-ups, but they're not going to have the same material properties as a manufactured product. So it cuts some of your design time down, so there's some advantage to that. But really the only thing that is you can only do with 3D printing is you can make certain exotic structures. So you can make things that have intricate bits on the inside of a solid metal sphere, for instance. That is actually a lot more useful than you'd think. It is currently being used in fuel nozzles and things like that, where it's like you're trying to produce this exotic flow pattern, and you got to make it out of a metal that can handle being inside a jet engine and that kind of thing. So it's useful for that. The promise of being able to make custom things, so like medical implants, so a custom shaped metal plate for your skull or teeth, that hasn't quite gotten there. They're starting to use it on teeth, but they're still going through other processes. It's not just like, scan your tooth and print it. And so far, the 3D printed implants that they're making they're actually just making the standard implant. They're just making it with 3D printing, which gives you this porosity on the surface, which is good for integrating with bone, but it's also little bits of titanium that can come loose and float through your body and block an artery and kill you. So that application is one of those that's probably going to go away. So I really think the only thing that's going to stick around in 3D printing is going to be rapid prototyping and exotic enclosed structures, which are really only useful in fluid handling equipment. So fuel nozzles, mixing, liquid mixing, continuous mixing gizmos, that type of thing. So yeah, not to pour a bunch of cold water on all your 3D printing fantasies, but 3D printing is not the miracle that a lot of people want it to be. Just like .com was not a miracle for printing money back in the 90s, like people thought it would be. Yeah. And you've always been able to make homemade guns, and it's actually really easy. I actually thought about doing it on camera, but I think that violates YouTube policies. Yeah, I mean, you can make something just as deadly as the Liberator pistol out of like a few sheets of paper and some tape. literally, like that's all it takes. So it's not something to worry about for you gun control people. Yeah, so hope you like that. It went a lot long today, well, almost 20 minutes. So if you found that boring, I apologize. If you found it interesting, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and maybe I will change my direction based on comments. So, all right, see you later.